In a previous video, we started our plant diary Scrum board, just with some stories on the left. Now, I'll re-emphasize the stories should be features. They should not be technical tasks. With one possible exception, something like a spike for an environment setup, that could be acceptable. The other thing is, it's really important that we just pick a couple of these stories to work on per sprint. And that's the job of the product owner, to decide which of the stories are the most important. So we don't need to add tasks for every single story that we have here, only the ones that we're going to be working in the coming sprint. So environment setup. We can think of a couple of things for this. I just click on the plus button there, and I can say something like install Eclipse, and we'll give that to me. This is one that I've already done. We might even say provision virtual machine. Okay, and again, I'll assign that one to me. We could give the story points as well. We could say, well, provisioning a virtual machine is about 2 story points. We'll go ahead and save that. Then I can go in and I can say set up Spring Boot. And that one could be maybe a couple of story points. Okay, assign that to me again. Typically, we'll assign these when we actually work them. Okay, now we'll say configure pom.xml. We'll just leave it at that. We'll make it kind of generic. And again, we'll assign that one to me. Okay. Create GitHub. Create GitHub repo. And assign to me. Okay. And then maybe we'll say start controller. That being the Spring Boot controller. So maybe I'll even say Spring Boot controller. And again, assign to me. Now, what we'll typically do is we'll look at these tasks, and several of these tasks I've added here we've already done. So install Eclipse. When I'm ready to work it, I'm going to put it in progress. Then verify means somebody else will double check my work. That could be a code review, design review, or anything else like that. And then finally, we'll move it to done when we're all done. Okay, provision VM. Since we've already done that, I'm going to go, let me drag it into in progress for a moment. Set up Spring Boot. Okay, configure POM XML. And create GitHub repo. Okay, now one note here. Note there are 4 things in progress with my name on it. And that is not right. There should only be one thing I'm working on at a time unless that thing is blocked. So I worked on a project one time where there were 19 things in progress. Scrum Master came in, counted 19 items, and asked how many team members there were. We said 4. And he said, well, then there should be only 4 things in progress, not 19, which makes a lot of sense. So anyway, keep an eye on that. I'll ask the Scrum Master of your group to keep an eye on that and make sure that everybody has 1 thing in progress at all time, maybe 2, but you really shouldn't have like 5 things. So Scrum Master should watch that. Also, feel free to move the task when it is appropriate. But as an absolute fallback, in your stand-up, that's a good time to move the task if you haven't done so yet. Stand-ups are typically daily in Scrum, but in our project, we're going to make them, well, I'll require you to meet at least once a week at a regular interval, but most group projects that do a really good job tend to meet twice per week. So in a normal workplace, we'd all be together and we could meet daily, but in an online class like this, it's kind of a different scenario. So we'll move my Start Spring Beam controller, and now essentially this story is done. Okay, now we know we only want to task out maybe 2 or 3 stories, and those are the ones that we're going to work on. So catalog my specimen. Okay, a bit of work here. So I'm going to think we need to create DAO interface. That shouldn't be too bad. That's essentially our contract between the DAO and the service layer. So create the DAO interface. Create a stub of the interface. Okay, and none of these I've started yet, so I'm going to leave them in progress. Okay, create interface implementation. So that is when we actually know, and let me say DAO interface implementation. That way we actually know, when we know how to do the implementation, we'll have a story for it. And again, I'm going to add here change. We'll make that create a stub of the DAO interface. Okay. Okay, create service interface. Okay, and create service stub. create service implementation. There we go. We also have to remember our unit tests. We might say create BDD test for given when then for service layer. And maybe we want to create BDD tests for given when then for DAO layer. Actually, we'll delete this as is for the moment. I'm just wondering if we need to break those down by layer. You know what? No, we don't. Let's not break them down by layer. I'm just going to change this to create BDD test for given when then. We'll leave that kind of a bit more generic. Okay, now we also need to handle the inputs through the Spring controller. So how is the user going to access us? Okay, create a look and feel page for insert edit mode. Okay. And then create a look and feel page for view mode. Something like that. Maybe we need to set up a template for consistency. So some kind of web template, something like that. So see, before long, we actually get to several technical tasks. So the to-do column should be technical tasks, while the stories column should just be the stories. Now, here again, I'll tell you that this is one way we're going to work together well this semester in a group scenario, is we're going to define these tasks together. And we will typically give them story points together, or points together. So we'll say, maybe not points, but for a task, we might give it an hour estimate. So from 2 hours to 2 days, that's generally the range that we'll give any of these. So create DAO interface. We might say, I said points earlier, but why don't we call that like a 2-hour job? So I'll do 2 hours. Create a stub of the DAO interface. Okay, maybe that's a 4-hour job, so we'll put 4 hours. Create service stub. That could be maybe a 6-hour job, so we'll put 6 hours. Now, how am I coming up with this? I'm coming up with this by myself, but in your group projects, what I'll recommend is before each sprint, you do a planning session where you sit down, everybody with either an electronic board like this or physical sticky notes, think of all of the tasks that are required to complete a story. And then think about how much time it would take to complete those tasks. Those can give you a really good idea of the amount of work in front of you, and you can determine, have I used an appropriate amount of work for this semester? Have I determined an appropriate amount of work? Okay, so that's where we start. Then as we work on a task, we know we move it in progress, and we know there should be one task in progress for everybody on the team. If you find that your team starts to get dysfunctional, that is, people aren't turning their work in on time, people aren't attending stand-up, and generally things are lagging, ask yourself if you're really using the Scrum board and you're really doing stand-up meetings. Don't get lazy with the stand-ups. It's very important that your group pick a time when you can all meet either in person or virtually and go through the stand-up. And in the stand-up, you say what you did since the last stand-up, what you're going to do until the next stand-up, and any blockers that are in your way. You also update the Scrum board. So I strongly recommend that you task out the Scrum board with the sprint planning meeting, and then throughout the sprint in the stand-up, you just kind of keep an eye on what's going on, and you can have an idea of if you're going to make your sprint goal or not. It's not that you're not going to make the goal that's important. It's knowing when you're not going to make the goal that's important. The earlier you can figure that out, the more time you have to plan. So in any case, we have this. We go ahead and copy it. We could task out some more if we wanted, but we take that, we copy it, we put it into our design document, and what's important is this should not be frozen right now in time, but it should be updated throughout the semester. So if your group contacts me and says, we're falling a bit behind, one of the first things I'm going to look at is that Scrum board and make sure that it is designed appropriately. As a matter of fact, when I'm going through and grading the design documents, I'll look through the Scrum board as well, and again, make sure that things are tasked out properly. Probably the most common issue that I see on the Scrum board is the stories are not functional, they're technical. It could be something like create the database, create all the interfaces. You wouldn't have that as a separate story because that's not really delivering value to the user. You're looking for things that are delivering value to the user. Another thing that I'll often see is maybe 9 stories, each of them with 2 or 3 tasks and to do. That's not really what we want. 9 stories are okay, but just pick 2 or 3 of them and be very verbose with the tasking on those 2 and 3. The others, don't even worry about tasking out until you have a sprint for it. So that's a little bit on the Scrum board. Hope this has been helpful. I look forward to reviewing yours. Thank you.